The New Orleans Saints now have no choice but to embrace a complete overhaul, and it should start this offseason. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a look at how this team is just in need of just about everything on its roster and why that's daunting. We're going to dive into how the New Orleans Saints failed in focus on this game. Basically everything that they wanted to achieve, they came up short on, and why now the New Orleans Saints are left with very little choice other than embracing a complete overhaul that must begin this offseason. We appreciate you very much, whether you're catching us live for this live episode or later. Whether it's your first time or your next time, we thank you for making us your first listen of the day every day and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. Go ahead and download the Prize Picks app and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You'll get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. The New Orleans Saints are desperately in need of a complete overhaul. If the Saints set out in this game with a chance to prove that there was something to build around long-term within its walls, they did not prove that with this game. Now, they got two more games to try to prove that as best as they can, but this was not the footing that they wanted to start off with. A 34-0 absolute demolition of the New Orleans Saints is orchestrated by the Green Bay Packers. Yes, the New Orleans Saints were on the road against one of the better teams in the NFC. Yes, the New Orleans Saints are without several starters when it comes to the offensive side. The New Orleans Saints don't have their lead defensive coordinator and defensive play caller because he was the head coach that they fired after what initially felt like rock bottom following a Week 9 loss to the Carolina Panthers. But that does not mean that this loss to the Green Bay Packers, an absolute embarrassment on national television on Monday Night Football, is not the new rock bottom. In fact, it is the new rock bottom for the New Orleans Saints. And there is no way that I can imagine that this New Orleans Saints organization can feel comfortable going into 2025 saying, run it back. Let's bring, free agency through getting players back from injury, rolling with a similar but still together coaching staff, having the same folks making decisions, all those other things. I'm going above the player in this situation when I'm talking about the New Orleans Saints are in need of new ideas, new direction, new innovation, new approaches, new opportunities, new ideas. The Saints right now look like a team without a direction, and for the first time under Darren Rizzi, look completely unprepared for their opponent. From minute 1 to minute 60, the New Orleans Saints were entirely outmatched in this game, and there are no excuses for that. I understand the injuries, I get all of it, but the Green Bay Packers didn't have their top wide receiver for several snaps in the game. They ended up resting their quarterback at the end of the matchup. They ended up having a running back who kind of tweaked something or had some kind of, ailment. And then so they ended up taking that running back out of the game. And oh, by the way, the Saints don't have a massive amount of injuries on the defensive side. That was effectively the same defense that they've been running for most of the season. Sans Paulson Adebo, who got injured much earlier in the season, and Marshawn Lattimore, who was traded away 5-6 weeks ago. Then you look over at the Green Bay defense. A Green Bay defense which does not generate a lot of pressure. That was without its top cornerback in Jair Alexander, whose safety, Evan Williams, was already dealing with an injury that popped up, a quads injury that popped up at the end of the practice week. And the New Orleans Saints offense could not muster could not find a way to get anything going over on the offensive side. No rhythm, no momentum. And every time that they did get a little bit of momentum, a turnover, a penalty, something like that. It was a lot of self-inflicted wounds for this New Orleans Saints team, no matter how outmatched they were against the Green Bay Packers. No one expected the New Orleans Saints to win this game, myself included. But I did not expect it to be a 34-0 absolute demolition of that team and of that roster and of that coaching staff. I did not expect the New Orleans Saints to get run off the football field the way that they got run off the football field in this game. And look, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm being fair. That's what we all watched this evening. Usually I try to do like a locked player of the game, and I'll bring up a graphic and all those other things. The locked player of the game is you because you watch that. The New Orleans Saints are in no condition right now to look at themselves as a team that has what it needs, even with getting players back from injury. Look at the three teams that they played that are amongst the best teams in the NFL. In prime time, on top of that, the Kansas City Chiefs lost. The Denver Broncos, not even competitive on Thursday Night Football. And again, that was in a situation where they were starting a rookie quarterback, all those other things, very similar to this situation with the Green Bay Packers. But to lose to this extent and to drop those three games, the way that they dropped those three games, it shows that this New Orleans Saints team is not prepared, whether it's Derek Carr at quarterback, whether it's Spencer Rattler at quarterback, to compete with the NFL's best. And that's what you build your team for. That's why the New Orleans Saints kicked the can down the road for so long. That's why the New Orleans Saints insisted on continuity and familiarity for so long, was because they wanted to continue competing. And I still think that in the moment, that was the right thing to do. But at this point, you have to say enough's enough. At this point, you have to say enough is enough. If the New Orleans Saints continue on this trajectory, they will not be competitive against the best teams in the NFL, period, hard stop, done. Nothing else to say when it comes to that, right? Like nothing else to argue when it comes to that. The Saints will not be competitive if they don't seek change, seek help, seek innovation. And that's what they must do over the course of this offseason. This game, this 34-0 blowout loss to the Green Bay Packers, shouldn't just be looked at as a Week 16 game that this team lost. This is a rock bottom moment for a free fall that began 4 seasons ago. And that is why the New Orleans Saints must find new direction beginning this offseason. The tricky part for New Orleans Saints fans, the upsetting part for you, is that it's going to take more than just one offseason to undo the damage and to get to a place where this team will again be competitive. It's going to be a multi-year rebuilding situation. And of course, we'll bring you through every single step of the way as that's going on. But do not expect things to just be better or be at their best in 2025. The New Orleans Saints don't have the mechanism to quickly get good. They're going to have to slowly and methodically rebuild, just like the way that they slowly and methodically have deteriorated over the course of the last handful of years. And I think you saw that deterioration biggest in this game when it came down to really looking at what it is that the New Orleans Saints were focused on achieving and how they failed to achieve each and every one of those things. Let's break that down next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, where you can make every moment more. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but still here throughout the rest of the regular season. You can go out there and get a big return over on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, especially if you are a new customer, because new customers can go to FanDuel.com, get started today, put $5 down, do it on a heavy favorite like the Green Bay Packers were, 14.5-point favorites, put it down on the money line. If you win that first $5 bet, you can get $250 in bonus bets right then and there simply by winning one $5 bet. Put it down on a heavy favorite, walk away with $250. You can dive into a bunch of other stuff as well. They've got props about which players will score touchdowns, anytime touchdown scorer, quarter spreads, live betting, live stats, and play-by-play in the app as well. It's all there for you. You can head over to FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com to get your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints absolutely dropped a big game up against the Green Bay Packers. Again, a game that no one expected them to win, but the fashion, the style in which they lost this game is one that, of course, is incredibly disappointing for the team and incredibly disappointing for you, the fan, as well. And now the New Orleans Saints are in a situation where they had set up a bunch of things that they were going to focus on in this game and failed to achieve each and every one of them. Let's run down the list. The New Orleans Saints came into this game with an opportunity to showcase its young talent. Starting quarterback Spencer Rattler, the rookie from this year's class, the 5th-round draft pick. Second-year running back Kendre Miller. First-year rookie offensive tackle, left tackle Taliesin Fuanga, who's been fantastic, especially here recently down the stretch. Starting cornerbacks Kool-Aid McKinstry, Alante Taylor, some folks on the defensive line like Brian Brzee and the defensive tackle spot and others. And massively underwhelming almost the entire group. And it's not specifically underwhelming because of them and their individual selves. It was underwhelming because it didn't feel like the offense or defense put them in position to even be successful. The New Orleans Saints offense remained what I would call pretty predictable in this game. Now they're without both their top wide receivers. They were without their top running back, and they were without their do-it-all weapon in Taysom Hill. And of course, starting quarterback Derek Carr. So that does limit your options in terms of what you're able to execute. I do understand that. You also had the injury to Eric McCoy early on in the game. Spencer Rattler spoke days ago about how much it changes everything to have Eric McCoy in at center, where they got like 2 plays with him before he ends up being injured. Tried to go back in, wasn't able to go in, ended up going back out. The Saints' young players were either not in position to succeed or failed to meet the opportunity on some occasions. I know there's going to be a lot of conversation around Spencer Rattler. This is almost like one of those losses that Spencer Rattler needed to feel. I was so glad to see the Saints keep him in for all 60 minutes. He needed to be on that field for the entire 22 minutes and 43 seconds or whatever it was that the New Orleans Saints possessed the football so that he could feel what that was like. And no, I never want to feel that again. So be interesting to see what he looks like the remaining 2 games of the season, assuming, of course, that Derek Carr does not make his return. But a lot of people are going to put a lot on Spencer Rattler. Fine. Totally fine. There were some things and bad mistakes that he made, bad decisions, the interception down the left sideline, but also a lot of drops, lack of protection over on the front. So if you want to put things on him, you can put things on him. If you want to give him a little bit of leeway, you can give him a little bit of leeway. Doesn't matter. He had an opportunity in this game to impress. He did not impress, completing 50% of his passes, throwing an interception, taking 3 sacks, fumbling the football on one of those sacks. Now he's got to be able to show that he can improve upon that in the next 2 games. So you know how I'm always about. It's not about what you do wrong, it's what you do next. Kendre Miller, same thing. He came into this game, ran only 8 times in this offense, picked up just 1.9 yards per carry when it came to the offense. The Saints really did go that committee approach in this game when it came to the running backs. We saw a lot more Jordan Mims than we saw just about anybody under center, or at running back. But when the gap opened up and the Saints finished the first half at a 3-touchdown deficit, there was no more running game to turn to after that point. And so you never really got an opportunity to see the youth take advantage of that opportunity there. Although I think that Jordan Mims, in terms of his ability to be somebody that could run and that could also catch the football, showed you a little bit of his versatility. But that's me picking a silver lining out. Taliesin Fuanga was credited with a hit that he gave up in this game. I'll be interested to see what the rest of his numbers look like. I'm going to have to go back and watch, but certainly gave up at least 1 hit or sack at some point during this game as well. You look at the cornerbacks, Kool-Aid McKinstry and Alante Taylor, a lot of big plays that were surrendered there. Ugo Amadi struggled a little bit in this one in terms of limiting some of the big plays. The pass rush wasn't necessarily there for the New Orleans Saints. If the idea was to showcase the young talent on this team, that young talent did not get showcased in this matchup. And so it didn't work out in this game. Hopefully they'll get better opportunities in the next couple of games. The next thing that they had an opportunity to do was to get another look at Darren Rizzi as a head coach up against one of the NFL, one of the NFC's best teams in the league. Darren Rizzi did not look the part. I'm just going to be honest. He did not look the part. Issues again with the running clock and things like that. I understand that it came down to the officials, but you got to be able to see whether or not the clock is running and then go in there and take that timeout. You finally get an opportunity at one point. The momentum towards the end of the game there, picking up, moving the football. Spencer Rattler was getting in a groove in that second, in that 2-minute drill, but then missed the fact that I get that you were told by the officials and all those other things, and there was communication that the clock was not going to be running. But if you can't see that the clock is moving, that's a little bit of a problem. So you've got to be able to do that. They have to be people that are in his ear saying, hey, the clock's not stopped, the clock's not stopped, the clock's not stopped, or something, so that he also has the supports. Where was the support in that situation? You look at the scheme on the offensive side, again, felt predictable, had a pretty good idea of what each thing was going to be for the New Orleans Saints. It looked like for that Green Bay Packers defense. The Saints defense unable to match up to that Green Bay Packers offense for the majority of this game, whether it be through the air or in the run game. The New Orleans Saints desperately need revamps almost everywhere when it comes to their defense, particularly when it comes to now, it's a different defensive play caller, all those other things. The Saints have got to get that leadership figured out. You have an offensive line that, again, is dealing with injury. And listen, I'm not going to use injury as an excuse for this game, because I feel like if you're going to be out on the field and you're going to put people out on the field, they got to be out there. I like the way that I think it's John DeShazer, Aaron Summers, and Scott Shanley always talk about it when they say, well, they're next man up for a reason. Completely understand that. But here's something you have to look at. Why are you hurt this badly every season? You got to be able to answer that question as an organization as well. The other thing that you had an opportunity here to be able to prove or to be able to do was show to a national audience, which included several of your top coaching candidates, right, that are going to be watching along in that game, and show them, hey, here are the foundational building blocks that we have to build off of, including quarterback Spencer Rattler, but then don't put him in position where he's able to succeed, right? Have only the flaws highlighted as opposed to some really nice throws that were made throughout that. Not be able to utilize Kendre Miller because it's clear that he doesn't really fully understand every bit of the nuance that's in this offense. So you're having to go back to some of these other guys in the back of your stable, right? Continuing to field an interior offensive line that continuously gets pushed back, which puts a lot of pressure on your young tackles over on either side. So even when those tackles are performing well, it's not going to be good enough because your center, your backup center, and your right guard and your left guard are all getting walked back after Eric McCoy left this game. If you're looking at a situation here to where you have the ability to showcase to a potential head coach, hey, look what we have to offer, the New Orleans Saints didn't show much that they had to offer in this game. A couple other things for you. A couple of the plans for this New Orleans Saints team coming into this one. They wanted to win the turnover battle. They lost it 2-0. They wanted to improve on third down. They turned around and converted just 4 of their 11 third downs over an offense. They wanted to get off to a fast start. Well, they were held scoreless from minute 1 to minute 6, the exact opposite of a fast start. They also only ran 6 plays in the first quarter. They wanted to, and they were intent on winning that line of scrimmage, limiting the Green Bay Packers run game as best as they could. Instead, they allowed 188 rushing yards. 5 players had more than a 4.5 rushing yard per carry average. And the Saints all told allowed a 4.8 rushing yard per carry average. Several players and the coaching staff also talked a bunch about how they wanted to force this team, the Green Bay Packers, into 3rd and long situations. And instead, when they did, they committed penalties on back-to-back scoring drives that turned out for Green Bay when they worked them into a 3rd and 6, working them and allowing them and gifting them a 3rd and 1. Instead, the New Orleans Saints had several focuses that they wanted to do: showcase their young talent, put themselves out there on a national TV audience for potential head coaching candidates. Those are probably more so my goals for them than their own goals, but they had the focus on third downs. They had the focus on the opposing third downs. They had the focus on winning the line of scrimmage, limiting the run game, getting off to a fast start, and they failed at every single one of those things. That's the truth of who the New Orleans Saints were in this game up against Green Bay. And one of the reasons why they failed is because this New Orleans Saints team lacks depth. And so far, they've lacked an ability to keep their high, or rather top tier players on the field. And because of that, that means that the New Orleans Saints team needs this offseason are absolutely daunting. And it's why I think it's going to take more than just 1 year to revamp this team. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks, my favorite way to play daily fantasy sports. You already love the game of football or basketball, whatever it is that you love. You're going to be able to find it over at Prize Picks. And it's super simple, right? It's not you versus a bunch of imaginary lineups and spreadsheet wizards, people with too much time on their hands that have cracked the code and all that. It's you and your knowledge of your favorite sport, your favorite players up against the projections. That's it. Prize Picks places projections on players. You can find a quarterback like Jared Goff over with the Detroit Lions that might have a projection for him at 230.5 passing yards. All you got to do is pick more or less. Do that for 2 to 6 players. You can walk away with 1,000 times your entry. And especially right now in December where they're giving you 2 free picks for Picksmas. Just download the Prize Picks app today to get started. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's $50 instantly with the promo code LOCKEDONNFL on your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. And now that you're winning money, let me tell you how to save money with our friends over at Rocket Money. You ever join Rocket Money and then all of a sudden you start saving a bunch of money because it ends up identifying all those subscriptions that you forgot that you were paying? Yeah, no, it's not like that's happened to me before. No, it definitely happened to me. And it's probably happening to you right now. It happens more times than you think. That's why Rocket Money is one of my favorite investments out there. And it's fantastic when it comes down to finding all of those, those subscriptions that you've already forgotten about, but they're also there all in one place, helping you find helping you out with your spending habits, reaching your goals, all that. One of my favorite things that they do is that goals feature to where I can set goals and then they help me hit those goals for my future without all of the pesky need of stressing about budgeting each and every month and all of that. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions today and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on to get started. rocketmoney.com/locked-on. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints team needs are absolutely daunting because you can make an argument that the New Orleans Saints have needs at every position on their roster and certainly have needs when it comes to their coaching staff and leadership. Let's take a look at just focusing on the roster where the New Orleans Saints need the most help. An ongoing conversation around what the New Orleans Saints should do at quarterback. They obviously could move on from Derek Carr this offseason if they really, really wanted to. They'd have to eat $50 million in dead cap, but they would be able to defer that $50 million to push a portion of it into next year by posting him as a post-June 1 transaction, thereby saving $30 million of new, now non-guaranteed money from 2025 specifically, which would give them some spending room, but that would only take place and set in June 2nd. And in order to do that, you would still have to get under the salary cap, which would require you to restructure a bunch of contracts, including aging veterans. So do you really help yourself in that situation by continuing to restructure the aging veterans, or do you need to start shedding some of the veteran talent on this roster, building up with new youth, keeping Derek Carr in 2025, and then worrying about quarterback 2026, 2027, and beyond? You can make any argument you want here. Everyone's going to have a different opinion. You could probably ask 6 people, get 6 different answers. That's okay. That's part of what it's like, right? So how the New Orleans Saints go about that is going to be what sets everything else in terms of their player, their roster, and all that kind of in course at that point. But the person that's going to make that decision probably isn't in the building yet, because that's going to be a head coach decision once the New Orleans Saints hire their new head coach, which I don't expect to happen until after the Senior Bowl, potentially after the Super Bowl, so that they can get in and interview some of the coordinators that do get to the Super Bowl this offseason. You look at running back, clearly like getting some additional talent outside of Alvin Kamara. Give Kendre Miller time to get a little bit more kind of caught up with the playbook and everything so he can be a little bit more of a heavy load guy, but then go and look for an alternative so that you also have somebody else that can mix in. At wide receiver, you're in desperate need of a wide receiver that can take over a football game. The Saints do not have that. Granted, the Green Bay Packers don't necessarily have that either, but they have guys that stay healthy, stay on the field, and are able to go out there and make big plays down the field with a fantastic quarterback to distribute the football. I would dare say that the New Orleans Saints lack a Jordan Love level quarterback on their roster right now. That doesn't mean that somebody can't develop into that, but they don't have that guy that's ready to go like right now at the top of 2025. So because of that, having sort of the lesser talented wide receiver room is not going to be an option for New Orleans. Now, thankfully, New Orleans would get back Chris Olave. They would get back Rashid Shaheed, but you'd like to have another one of those can take over the game type of wide receivers also involved in that duo to turn that into a trio, make it a little bit more threatening, make it a little bit harder for nickel defenses and things like that to be able to match up with you. Tight end, I think you're probably just looking for more sure-handed options, big play options, things like that, although I love what Foster Moreau has been doing this season. And on the offensive line, I think you have to ask major question marks about what you really have on the offensive line, particularly on the interior, not only from a talent perspective, because they have one of the best centers in the NFL, but from a health perspective as well. Do you have the guy that can come in and lessen the drop off a little bit in case you're dealing with more injuries from Eric McCoy or for Eric McCoy in 2025? So that's another spot that you have to get things figured out. And you'll notice that, like, as I go through all this, I'm talking about all of it through a 2025 lens, but you're probably not going to be able to address all of this just in 2025, especially depending upon, or especially looking at the fact that the Saints don't have a lot of money to spend in free agency. There's $63 million over the salary cap going into 2025 and can't get the majority of their relief until post June 1, depending upon which transactions they do at that time. And that's not limited to just the Derek Carr conversation. That expands beyond that as well. Potential other departures, things like that. And so the Saints aren't going to be able to just rely on the draft to fix all of these things because there's no surefire draft pick in that way. But they're also not going to be able to rely on free agency in 2025. So they might have to wait until 2026 to address another bulk of these big things. But as a part of the overhaul, these are some of the things the New Orleans Saints need to be considering. The Saints also need a speed pass rusher that can take over a game and be a consistent threat week 1, week 2, week 3, all the way to week 18. I don't think that the Saints have that right now. They have really good and talented players that pop off for a couple of games, whether that's Carl Granderson, whether that's Chase Young, whether that's Cameron Jordan. They have the players that can take over games and that can have a big presence in games, but they don't yet right now have that speed rusher that can fly off the edge, get to the quarterback, and do so on a game-by-game basis and be somebody that opposing teams absolutely have to game plan for, like a Micah Parsons or somebody like that, right? Somebody in that category of player. The Saints, at linebacker, are going to have to get things figured out there too, because you want to be ready for your future at that position. At cornerback, the Saints are looking at Kool-Aid McKinstry, looking at Alontae Taylor, still opportunities for those guys, but is investing in the cornerback position a bad choice? I don't think so. Defensive tackle, this defensive line consistently gets walked off and walked back in the run game. The Saints absolutely need somebody that can be that Malcolm Brown kind of a guy that can kind of stodge things up in the middle of the defensive line of the offense to limit some of that run game. And at safety, I think you just need to be ready for the future there as well, with a couple of veterans that are back there. So you look at the team needs for this team across their roster, and I think you can make the argument that every team at most of its positions has the opportunity to get better and should be looking at investing in getting better. That's not rocket science here for the New Orleans Saints, but there's a difference between looking at improving and getting better and where the Saints are, which is where they desperately need attention at almost every single position on their roster. And beyond that, they also need to make sure that the right people are making the decisions about the players that are indeed doing that, and that the right people are keeping those players healthy and giving them access to what they need to be able to do that as well. And do the New Orleans Saints have the resources to be able to correct all of that in one offseason? Absolutely not. No NFL team does. But that's why the New Orleans Saints, who just reached, I believe, the bottom of the pit when it comes to that free fall that started many, many moons ago, have to look at themselves in the mirror and say that things desperately need to change and that they need to overhaul or begin the overhaul. You're not going to overhaul all in one season, but need to begin the overhaul here in 2025. If not, it's going to be a really, really tough sell to Saints fans if the New Orleans Saints turn around and try to roll with familiarity and continuity once again. The thing that, even though it felt like the right decision at that time, I'm looking at it in hindsight, to be fair, the same process that began years ago that has led to this point, you cannot continue if you're the New Orleans Saints moving forward. It's time for something new in New Orleans. I appreciate you very much for being here for another episode of Locked On Saints. I have a fresh episode for you on Wednesday. This is on Christmas Day. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays to everybody. Merry Christmas Eve. I'm sorry that this was your early Christmas gift of the week and everything, but we will have another Wednesday episode for you, starting to look ahead to Las Vegas Raiders and kind of revisiting this game in a little bit more detail as well, especially looking at the individual performances of players as opposed to kind of the overall kind of knee-jerk reaction evaluations to the team. So we'll take a look at all that. Crossover Thursday on Thursday, diving into it more on Friday. But I appreciate you very much, whether you're here live or you're catching the show later, being here so late. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And for still supporting the show, despite what the team might have looked like on Monday night. Because I promise you one thing, I will never be shut out. So I appreciate you very much for being here for another episode. We appreciate you for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family is doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.